What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Female Bodybuilding Girls in Gear. I'm your host, Tommy Stiles. With me, Shannon Seeley. Shannon, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you, T?
Good. Can't complain. Another beautiful day. So if you are listening on YouTube, like, share, comment, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications for more content coming at you every week with 4 different segments, various drop dates and amounts per week based off of recording schedules. If you are on Facebook, join the Muscle Media Network Facebook group, search Muscle Media Network, request to join. You will be let in. Pretty good group of people over there talking about all things bodybuilding. The season's starting to heat up. We got the Arnold Classic in, I think, 2 weeks or a little under 2 weeks now. So it's like the first big show of the year to kick things off. Preps are starting. I'll be living vicariously through my clients and all my friends prepping this year because I will not be hitting the stage. So I know you're in the same boat.
Yep.
Which is a good thing. I'm not sad about it. I don't have like FOMO. I've been through enough preps to be like, all right, I can make it a year.
Yeah.
So anything new with you?
Nope, nothing new. I know we've been following my gut health thing, so I had some more tests done, still inconclusive. So now officially I'm doing the GI map, waiting for the results back from that, and then we'll go from there. But you know what? As I keep telling everyone, like I'm really enjoying this off season right now. I know I'm not be able to push as hard as I am, but it's interesting to see how my body's responding to what I am able to do. And I'm very surprised at how well it's doing for how lack of nutrients I'm able to get right now. But my training's been great. I mean, my muscles been staying on, and, I'm completely natural right now and I feel good. So we'll just kind of take it with a grain of thought, grain of salt. And I have the whole year. It seems like it's like, oh no, it's February now, but if I have at least a good solid 8 months of a solid off season, I'm very happy with that. So if I can get everything kind of course corrected by April, we'll be good.
Yeah. Leaving the time spent fixing things is like, that's what I'm
Yeah,
noticing right
I
now.
know. I can't rush it. We want to rush it, but it's just like, I can't. We just got to take it slow. And that's the hardest thing, I think, is you want answers, but it's like, you got to try it and, do the longevity of it to see what helps.
Yeah. No, I have a couple clients who got GI maps who, I mean, it'd be nice if we're just expecting it to be pretty bad based
Yeah.
off a lot of their symptoms. And they're like nervous to have to pull back because, they kind of watched my process. And now having gone through it, I can kind of tell them like, hey, it's, in total, it was like just shy of 3 months. It's a
Yeah.
small trade-off to feel the way I feel now, like healed gut, no bloating. I'm pushing a lot of food again, and it's going down with ease. There's no like fear of food, and I'm not walking around bloated.
Yeah.
Bowel movements are normal. So I think for that trade-off, it's worth having to pull back and maybe not make progress at the rate you want.
Mm-hmm.
But getting into today's topic, I know you brought one, so run
Yeah,
it.
today I really wanted to, and it's great that we're kind of talking about pulling back because this is actually kind of something we can talk about. Is today I wanted to talk about like the timeline of a female who gets into the sport, and we're talking long term. So when you're listening to this, think we are talking long term. We're going to talk about today a little bit of like what we see with the female as we start competing, and kind of the timeline of where we see the changes, what kind of happens with our faces, and when we're starting to put on so much muscle and we're losing fat in certain areas, and what we kind of expect to see over time. Because I've been seeing a lot more is some people who are in the sport or just starting out. The biggest question I see is, well, why do we look so old when we're dieting down? And that comes with a lot of the fat loss and stuff. So I really wanted to kind of dive into that, especially for these competitors who are in a season that are kind of looking to do the long-term thing, is what you kind of expect and can expect with this sport, and what you can kind of do in your off seasons to kind of help your body as it's healing and regenerating from the side effects of the prep. So I thought that'd be kind of a good thing to kind of look at. The internet's so filled with misinformation. So if you look in like long-term effects for bodybuilders, you're going to have some AI generated horrendous, picture of a before and after. So I think it's really smart to look at the root of what happens and why it's so smart, and why T and I preach about making sure that you're educated with what you're going to use and the compounds to ensure that you aren't going to have this huge giant change over time, where you look at when you competed from when you were 16 years old to 56, and you look and be like, wow, like they don't even look like the same person. So I just wanted to kind of dive into that today. The first thing I wanted to start out is like, typically when you first start, a prep. Where when we first start, you go in, you're not on compounds, you're not on anything, you're just doing the prep typically to see where it is. So you don't have I've never seen somebody that's really jumped into the sport that's had like the most intense prep season where their diet phase is so sunken in. And I'm talking about your first prep when you're just getting your feet wet. You don't know. We have good preps, but I never have seen a competitor that's really has that conditioning or that level of graininess just because you're jumping into it. And mind you, I should go back. I'm talking about when you start young, like not when you're like 50. Like if you're jumping into the sport when you're 18, 19, 20 years old and you're doing your first prep, you're going in blind. You're not going to see the level of prep that we would see from a seasoned competitor or a pro. Usually we see everyone a little bit softer. You're not going to bring in that level of conditioning. You're not going to have the extreme diet phases or fat loss in your breast tissue or your glutes or anything like that because your body's just getting acclimated. The way that the body starts with a prep is it's not going to be, it changes every year. It gets a little bit more extreme. Your body gets adapted to it, but your first prep is always going to probably be not your best prep. And I don't know how to say it in terms, yes, you could give it all, but your body's not going to respond the best that it ever has because your body's just getting used to the way that you're feeding it and your hormones are getting used to it. So when you take that, what you look like aesthetically there, and then you follow your protocol off season, we start seeing changes every year with those preps. We start seeing from your first prep, you can look side by side and see next prep. And we talk about how your muscles and your tissues and everything starts to just mature a little bit each time with the process. And they get used to the prep a little bit better. And you see a little bit more conditioning because your body has to be taught the process. And that's when we start seeing the long-term duration of it is when we start seeing the conditioning get on, we start seeing the compounds getting involved. That's when we really start seeing a lot of the changes from on season to off season. I don't know how to separate this, you guys. I'm sorry, because I don't know how to separate this because I can just like talk now straight through this for 45 minutes. So I got to take a breather here. T, do you want to add anything to that before I keep going on my rant?
No, you're on. I know where you're going, so I'm just kind of like letting you go. And
Yeah.
it is, you can only speak on it once you've like been through it because you see the change within your body.
I really wanted to do this podcasting with this topic. And the reason I was doing this is because I always, every couple of years, I'll look at even like my high school pictures for before bodybuilding to now, because I get a lot of comments about my jawline when I'm dieting down. And it's very common for a female over time. When we get diet phases more and more extreme, we start losing a lot of the fat, especially as we get leaner and leaner, our body we lose this is usually the last thing we see females lose. But when we lose all this fat in here, it makes our jawline a lot more pronounced. And if you are on any compounds, it's just going to add to that. So typically I look I have a very long jawline when I'm in like the peak of my season. But what happens is my filler or my fat's gone. So you look older. So people who don't know the sport, they might see me in my season competitor, peak thing and be like, wow, she's only 30. She looks like she's 60. And the reason is because we have no fat in here. So when you see a competitor off season, on season, you have to understand, like, you can't really go, you're never going to be able to guess her age. Let's be honest with that, because we're all going to look a lot older. But you have to understand is that over time, your body starts utilizing fat in different areas that it not necessarily we would when you're just doing a normal diet. If you were just a person just trying to lose a couple pounds, you're never going to have that fat loss in your face. But when you're going to the level of extremeness that we do as bodybuilders, you understand is you're literally basically getting yourself peeled to the condition where you don't want any body fat. You're literally dieting down. So you are like the cleanest, as I always call it, like a purge of your body, like a purge of body fat. Like you want to be able to you want to look like an anatomy board. I would love to sit up in a science class and be like, draw me. You can tell me exactly what muscle. And that's my favorite thing to see. And that just comes with time. Like you're going to get that structure and you're going to start losing that. And it's harder for younger competitors when you're a teenager, because we still have that residual baby fat, that brown fat that we're all born with. And women do tend to have a little bit more brown fat even as we age. And it literally is in our jawline. It's in our, typically goes in our neck for women. And it's just one of those things that depending on how hard we push our preps, we're going to see a lot more of the changes. Now, you can avoid changes and you can avoid changes. There's certain stuff that you're not going to be able to do. This sport does age you. It does. I mean, it ages you, but there are ways to go about it that can help you in your off season. That's going to help you kind of preserve some of your femininity, your longevity. I preach femininity a lot too, because for females, seems to be like a lot more coming up the time. They want us bigger, they want us brainier, but they want us to have that femininity. So for those listening who are really on that borderline, what should I take? It's very important, and I know we've talked about it before, is make sure that you're knowledgeable about what you're taking, but off season, get off everything. Okay. There's even season pros come off stuff. Obviously, like the higher up the ranks, there's little doses you're going to run here and there, but you should be able to run or come off everything completely. Personally, and I'm going to use myself as an example, I have been off everything completely. I even talk about HGH. I have been off everything since October. And I noticed tremendously just from putting on my fat, like I look younger all of a sudden again because I'm starting to get filler back in my face and I look more feminine. And that's just because I'm in my off season now. I'm putting on fat. I'm healthier. And I make sure that now that I have the fat in my face, I'm taking care of my skin. I'm making sure that everything, like I'm protecting it from the sun. It's just little shit like that over time that if you can just do these little habits, and I know it's going back to habits like we talked about, but it's little habits that if you can start early in this sport, it really pays off over time with the aging routine. Especially like if you're someone who tans for the sport. I know a lot of bodybuilders tan. I don't tan. But that ages you as well. So make sure that if you are one that overly tans, you're hydrating your skin. When you are outside, you are wearing sunscreen. It's stupid little stuff that we know we should be doing. But with this sport, especially for females, it's something that if you can stop contemplating about doing it and just do it, it's going to really preserve the way that your body changes over time, prep to prep to prep. If you're one of those hardcores that just like, nope, I'm going to go all in, we see the aging process come faster. We see the hair coming out faster. We see stuff, the body's really starts rejecting it because it needs that natural flush. It needs that natural off season to get the hormones back. And I know I preach it all the time, but you guys have to understand the importance. It's so, so important to just have that off season and be feminine again, basically get your female hormones, get the menstrual cycle. If you're not menstrual cycle, allow yourself to have hot flashes, going pre or post menopause. It is so, so important. And I think we have to acknowledge that a little bit more, because the sport is changing and they're changing the criteria ever so often. So you have to make sure that you are taking care of yourself on season, off season, and go from there. Turning transition from like physical attributes, I want to talk a lot about the training attributes because this is a big thing that we see, is the breast implant discussion. Because I know that we have friends, both of us, that we've seen them compete naturally, then they get in the sport, then they start losing their breast tissue because of the amount of muscle development. And so lo and behold, they get breast implants within the next season. The question I get asked a lot, is it required? Do you need them? No, you never need breast implants. The judges are never going to say, hey, get boobs, you'll look better. Understand that right now. Like it is something that I know as a female bodybuilder, I'd struggle with. I've gone back and forth. Should I get implants? Should I not? I know plenty of females who have them, plenty who don't. That's totally up to you. The reason that we see a lot of females delving into this, and I literally just read a stat, it says 80% of female competitors do end up getting, that compete in the sport end up getting implants at some time. And a lot of the reason is because when we're lifting so hard in the intensity, and again, over time with the training, the compounds, and you start losing your breast tissue because it is one of the fattier parts. We see the women, the butts and the boobs are typically, especially if they have a higher level of fat, those are the first things that you're really going to lose. And when you are in like an extreme level of fat burning and deficit, you can't really build your boobs back up. It's not something that you're going to be able to do. So if that's something that you like, if you're starting in the sport and you really like your boobs, like understand that if you're lifting extremely heavy and you're in this sport and you're in this for a long time, they are going to go down and you are going to develop basically almost pec-like because you're going to have a nice upper muscle chest development. And then that's up to you if you like it or not. Again, I'm not pro, I'm not for it, I'm not against it. It's totally up to you if you want boobs, but just understand that's a decision you'll also have to make as you go in the sport. That is something that I don't think people realize. It happens a lot faster than you think. Usually I think within the first 4 years of me training chest I lost my boobs completely. So it's something that's just a choice for you. Like I personally don't mind the look. I know like do you have competitors that have implants at all? Yeah. And
probably more than,
and it's not, it doesn't aesthetically, it doesn't bother. Like, I think they look great. I know with the thing with implants though, is if you are like going to be doing bodybuilding or physique or something that's a lot more chest movements, that is something you're going to have to take into account too, because I do have competitors that want to do physique. They got implants. Now it makes it a lot more challenging to train that area depending on how you get them, because, you know, for the first, what is it, 8 to 10 months after you get implants, you're not even really supposed to be training chest, because you can cause issues with that. So anything that you're doing in this sport that you're trying to do for change, for physical change, understand there's going to be a consequence, positive or negative, that whatever you do long term. So even like before bodybuilding, let's say that you have implants, okay, and then you start, you know, training and all that stuff, you might have to get them redone because of the amount of chest movements. It's little stuff like that, like over time, that you have to think about. And that's why, even though it's like a very present moment sport, a lot of people don't see themselves doing bodybuilding for the rest of their lives. It is something that these little decisions, because it's such a quick sport to age because of what we do with all the compounds and stuff we do, you have to really make a decision of how you want to see your long-term career in the bodybuilding and set those boundaries. And I know I've talked about that in a couple of podcasts before, is make sure as a female, you have your boundaries set of what you won't, what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And be true to yourself and do that. I really say, like, I feel like that's the strongest thing a competitor do is stay true to yourself and what you're willing to do and what you're willing to take, and understand, you know, basically the whole dynamic of the sport and what it can do long term. Another thing that I know, and I know you and I kind of have had podcasts before about talking about the side effects, but another thing that I like to talk about too is I talked about when I first started and I had virilization and I had some facial hair, and so I got laser hair removal. Now here's the thing, I still obviously take androgenics every season. Just because I have laser hair removal doesn't mean it's got rid of it. I still have areas where I have to, you know, pluck and shave. And that's another thing that you're going to have these issues just because you're deciding to take these compounds. So that is something that even if you are doing everything perfect and you're like, no, I have laser hair removal. No, I'm making sure that I'm getting off stuff because I noticed my voice changing. Even though you're aware of your side effects, it isn't something that you can battle and fight and just like diminish them. Like once they kind of start and your body starts developing certain virilization, be prepared that it's going to continue to happen. It's not something that if you get laser hair removal, you're never going to get hair there again. It's something that you're going to have to continuously take care of. Something like maybe your hair starts thinning. That's something that you continue, if you're already starting to thin hair when you're taking compounds, and you get some nice medication or shampoo that's going to make that follicle growth, be prepared when you start that prep again and you're taking compounds. If your body already responds a certain way, you're going to probably have thinning hair and loose hair again. So it's just one of those things that I love the sport. You love the sport. There are so many positives with the sport, but it's also bringing awareness of how much the sport does damage you too, if you're not prepared for it. If you're not prepared, I know people that go in, do hardcore for 5 years, and then we see the kidney, liver, we see the internal starting to deteriorate. We see the external, they didn't take the best care of themselves. So it really ages you. And that's the biggest thing I always as a proactive is make sure that, especially for females, you understand that there are going to be a lot of changes for your body, a lot. I just had this conversation yesterday because I'm in my off season. I've been competing now this is my 11th year. And we had Emily Schubert on a podcasts ago. We all still have body dysmorphia issues. It doesn't matter how lean we are. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It doesn't matter, like, if you're in this sport and you look shredded as hell on stage, like, it's very common for males and females alike. It doesn't matter how lean or how fat you get. We're all going to critique our bodies because you are in the sport too, where it's so self-critical and you're always going to critique yourself. You're never going to be good enough. And that's kind of the mindset. You never want to be good enough. You never want to look at yourself in the mirror and be like, damn, I'm going pro. Like I'm looking great. Like, you're always going to see a flaw in yourself, and you should honestly with the sport. It's a very, like, you should be pointing out your flaws and what you can grow with, but also understand that if you already struggle with an eating disorder, you're struggling with body dysmorphia and you're not in the sport, it's going to be elevated a tenfold if you get into this sport and do not have that mental capacity under control getting into that. I'm going to pause again to let T kind of contribute, because again, I just keep talking.
No, you're nailing it. I think a couple things to point out too is all this is just awareness. On the female side, it's from your experience. I have experience obviously working with people and being in bodybuilding for 10 years, and I've seen the changes that people go through. I've even seen my own perception of femininity kind of shift as the deeper I've gotten into bodybuilding. Like when I got in, 10 years ago as a natural, I looked at, girls who had a lot of muscles, like not gross, but I couldn't appreciate everything that went into it. And I just was unaware. So it was like kind of maybe like an ignorant approach. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not into that. But then you kind of, it's the more muscle you put on as a male, you start to appreciate females with muscle, because it's hard to like, it's just a different approach, because, someone that doesn't have a lot of muscle, I don't feel as comfortable around.
Right.
But, that's the big thing I want to point out too is, it's for females, the devil is in the dose over the years, though. It's not one cycle that I think is going to just take you from no sides to having all the things you just mentioned. I think it's the years of compounding use. And it's kind of a catch-22, because you could be your highest body fat when you start bodybuilding. And you have fullness in your breasts. Everything is, if you're unenhanced, every time you keep pulling those down and pulling all the fat out of them, and probably taking things, maybe Nolvadex, that's going to have an effect on breast tissue, and then pushing back up and then coming back down. I mean, I've seen it with my face. All the years of pushing up and down, like my jaw is now like, the skin is like saggier.
Yeah, like the elasticity of the collagen are just,
I probably will need do that staple or that jaw lift thing when I'm done competing, because that's one thing I don't like, is like my face kind of hangs. Like the bone is actually a lot higher up than the skin looks. And I just started noticing it within the last 2 years, but it's from my face gets really fat in the off season. And then when I diet, it's really sucked in. All my bones can show, and it's a look I like.
Yeah.
But that's just part of the game. When you're pushing your body weight up and down 40 to 60 pounds every year, like think about, stretching a rubber band. The more times you stretch it out, it's going to start to lose that elasticity and kind of look just kind of like blown out and saggy. That's what you're doing to your body potentially. So with breasts, it's like, if you're pulling all the body fat off them and then putting it all back on, as you should, because it's the healthy way to do it, they're going to have a different look than if you just kind of kept a healthy amount of body fat as like your base, whereas like someone who's not competing would.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any reason
for sure
for a female
and the stretch marks too. You have stretch marks. Women.
Oh yeah.
Funny, because women are so worried about stretch marks when they're pregnant, but like, I'm like, have you seen stretch marks? I have stretch marks on my armpits. Guys tend to get them. I see them a lot with the guys, but the bigger you get, there's stretch marks everywhere. I'm gonna tell a story, because I will always remember this story. It was when I did nationals in 2015, and I'm gonna warn you guys, it's not graphic, but it is to an extent. But this was my wake-up call of when I started in the sport. And I was like, holy shit, like this is stuff that I'm going to have to embrace. So I went into nationals, and I had done 2 shows before this. Okay. Went in, and at this time, like I had never been in a communal spray tan area. I had done local shows. So I had a private spray tan person who would do my spray tans. So, and we discussed this one time, like when you larger shows, it's basically like a giant room. You're all pretty much naked, getting spray tan intense, and then standing in front of a fan. For women, especially, we're literally all standing completely naked in front of a fan while our tan dries. Okay. You guys were naked. Okay. And I remember I was, 20 years old, 21 years old, and I'm going in to this, and the girls are all naked standing there. And I remember, like, you try not to stare. Okay. You try not to stare, but it's kind of hard when you have all these women, you're comparing yourself to look at the physiques, who you're going to compete against. And again, you're all naked. So I remember this girl turning around, and she's in front of the fan, and I just see these flaps of skin, the fan's blowing them. And I realized that it's her boobs. And for me, I was like, oh my gosh. And for me, I was like, wow, that's so weird. And then I realized, like, that's what happened. So that's what I'm saying, like the graphic, like that happens to a lot of females. Like you literally, I call them tea bags. Like we get tea bags basically because the fat just keeps coming back. And so just understand, like, some of the stuff we don't talk about, because a lot of women are embarrassed about it, but it's a very natural thing that happens with our boobs, because of how much fat we lose and then try to put it back on. so fast in the off season and losing it back and forth. So we had the stretch marks, and you can see why a lot of women aim to get those breast implants, because it just kind of takes the takeaway. They have them. They know they look fake, but it will just kind of keep that up. So, but that was my eye opener when I was like, okay, if I make the decision, this is probably going to happen to me. And it did, and it's okay. Like, I mean, it's part of the sport. It doesn't bother me. But it is one of those things that you have to really be aware of, because once it goes, you can't change it unless you want to go for the surgical route. But I always remember that. I always envisioned in my head, because when I started that, it scared me for a minute, because I actually got an up close view and I was like, wow, these are side effects that I really have to be aware of, because that's something that is non-reversible once it happens. So that is one reason. I don't do this to scare you guys. For me, it was just a wake-up call to realize like the severity and the seriousness of the sport. And that's why, like, I always tell people when I hear all these people in the gym saying, oh, I want to be a bodybuilder, I want to take X, Y, and Z, like, this isn't just like a decision you can make lightly and be like, I'm going to do this for a little bit. Like, it is something that if you're in the sport, you have to understand the financial commitment, the physical commitment, the mental commitment. I mean, mentally too. And I know you and I both, like, mentally, this sport will mess you up too. You have to have a very strong head on your shoulders. And I'm not just talking about, and it's stuff it's uncontrollable. When you're in prep, there's a lot of stuff mentally you cannot control, because your serotonin levels and all your receptors and everything in your brain is going all crazy because of the hormones and the compounds. And that is stuff that you really can't control. So it's just a lot of, like, today we're just kind of nitpicking on these little niche, nuances that I just want you guys all to be aware of, and I'm not trying to scare you. T's not trying to scare you. This is just stuff that's real. It's stuff that nobody talks about. And it's stuff that you wouldn't really think the importance of, but over time, it's like, it's very important, because those little things over time add up to like big results. So that's one of the reasons I just want to tell you guys that story really quick, because that was my eye opener of being like, okay, I need to be a lot more aware of what I'm putting in my body, how I'm going to progress in a sport where I want to maintain, if I want to have a baby. That was my huge eye opener, just knowing the toll it took on that female and what I wanted to do similarly, what I wanted to do different moving forward for my boundaries. So I don't know. I'm sure other people have had their eye-opening experiences of like the harsh reality of the sport, but it is something that I think people talk about not as much as they should, because they're embarrassed about some of their physical changes, especially for females, when we see a lot of physical changes that we don't want to talk about.
Yeah, I think especially if you don't know, I think that's where a lot of the negative judgment can come from, is people just, if they see a jawline that's a bit harsher on a female, they just like, oh, steroids. But, there's predispositions too. I know natural girls who you can tell that if they were to diet down, even naturally, they're going to have a pronounced jawline just based off the structure of their and the chin, everything kind of ties in. Same thing with like, acne is usually a predisposition.
Yeah.
I never had an issue with it. Never had one single problem with it. I have guys that it's like, I see, and women who I see like it's a thing we have to consider when using PEDs, and there's skin treatment that has to go into it. There's certain compounds we can't use. So there's all these things are predispositions too. It's not like, if you diet, if you take PEDs, you will get a square jaw, or if you do this, you will get this. It's not like a rite of passage. It just is like, after a certain amount of years of doing the same thing and pushing the levels of extreme, there's going to be fallout from that. That is, it shows. And obviously to like our trained eye, it's like I can meet someone and based off a lot of factors, I can probably tell their level of use. Like, oh, that person's been, banging gear for, if I meet an older lady who's got a raspy voice, who has that, that look to her, I'm like, she's got years of cycling under her belt. Same thing with like, I can meet a dude and like, I can see, physical attributes about him that show me he's been training with weights for decades. And it shows. His shoulders are rolled forward. He might have a rounding of the spine. He might have like a limp. That's part of it. I mean, when you are putting your body through the ringer with hard training and then drug use and pushing food, you made a good point about steroids. They do age you. They speed up the aging process. So that's one thing I've noticed about myself, especially if like I look at someone who's natural, my age, who has taken care of themselves, who hasn't been like a complete typical American.
Yeah.
They look 10 years younger than me,
Yeah.
easily 10 years
Yeah.
younger than me. Like I look, especially when I have a beard, I look in my 40s. And
Yeah.
that's been happening since like my late 20s, where it's like, wow, I look 10 years older than everyone else
Yeah.
around me. And I can attribute that to probably the lifestyle of bodybuilding, the drugs, you know, years of being sleepless with the fire service. It all does compound over time.
Mhm.
So these are just things they might be how it goes for you. But I also point out, like, we're bringing awareness to it, but at no time during, like, even now when I'm pushing and I have a goal and I'm competing, I'm not thinking about side effects. I'm
Right.
not, there's,
Right.
it's not in my head. There is a
Yeah.
time, and
Yeah.
this is extreme, where caution for all the stuff we're talking about is an afterthought.
Yep.
This is stuff for the off season. This is like for a female who's going to wants to get to your level or higher. It's important to spend time off, especially in the
Mhm.
off season. But there does have to be an understanding that in a contest prep, we're throwing caution to the wind a little bit, especially the last 8 weeks leading into a show.
Yeah.
I pay, there's no amount of caring I have in that last 8 weeks, because I know I've done everything I can to be in the healthiest spot possible. And it's important to be healthy to peak properly. But at the same time, like, you can't be worrying about long-term side effects when you're days out from a show. It's just, it doesn't happen. And I've
Right.
never met anybody who like loves bodybuilding and loves the pursuit and the process who's thinking like that. They're all in, they're tunnel vision on that date. They're not focused
Right.
on like, well, what's my jaw going to look like in 5 years? Or, oh, what's my blood pressure? Like, it's the ugly truth. It's not on your mind.
Yeah, no, and realistically, at 8 weeks out, your mental capacity, that's probably the last thing on your mind. And I'm glad you brought that up. Like, your off season, what I do is every off season, I've done this since I started using and doing compounds, is I sit down with my coach. What are you thinking about? What are you thinking about me taking this year? What do you think yes? What do you think no? And we talk about it briefly. I write everything down and I then research that so I understand what I'm going to experience for these, especially if it's something that I've never taken before. And that's something I always urge. And I'm so, I preach it all the time, you guys, but I'm very proactive. It's okay to ask questions, your coach, and it's okay for you to take that information and read up on it yourself and ask additional questions. And that's the off season. Like, I always make sure that I have my plan and I know what I'm going to expect. And that's it. And I'd be like, okay, hey, I got to add this compound in at 9 weeks out. So pre-prepared that I'm gonna be extra bitchy for the next couple of weeks. Like, that is stuff that I already know the timeline. And I make sure to communicate that with my support system too. Be like, hey, we might notice that someone needs to drive me these weeks because I'm going to be really depleted. And I'm also going to be taking this and I'm not going to want to. So it's one of those things that it's just being proactive. But yes, she's actually right. When you're on your prep season, that stuff should have already been taken care of. That is not something that you can say, hey, wow, I'm having these side effects now at 6 weeks out and I'm just going to stop, because that's another thing. If you've been taking something for so long and then you all of a sudden just stop it, that can mess up your entire prep at the same time, because you've been taking a hormone your body's utilizing. And then if you just pull it because you don't like the side effects and you weren't aware of it, that can just destroy your entire prep depending on the way that your body's processing those hormones. So that is why it's super important too, to make sure you know what you're taking and be prepared. Your off season is your preparation for your on season. You should not be preparing for anything on your on season. I mean, my only things that I prepare in my on season is I make a name, be like, oh, I got to book my hotel this day and register for my show this day. Those are the only two things that I really care about for the prep. Other than that, my meds are ordered, my compounds are ready. I know the timeline. And that way you are doing the clear, concise, you're not having to think, because the more stress that you add on your actual season, it's going to mess you up mentally. I'm all an advocate for the lower stress. And so the more shit that you can get done in your off season and make that a prep season, nice, easy flow, do it, because it's just going to make you have a lot better polished physique just going forward because you're prepared.
Yeah. No, I think it's important just to, yeah, like it's the whole podcast, and a lot of the theme of most of our podcasts is just bringing awareness, especially for
Yeah.
the females. There's a lot of stuff that cross applies to both genders, but
Yeah.
I just, there is you have it, I have it. It's intense. There's a championship mentality that kicks in where it's like, I'm not worried about my cholesterol 4 weeks out from a show. I'm not worried about anything of that nature. I'm going to do
Yeah.
all the things I can do. I'm taking all my supplements. I know what supplements I need to be taking, but
Yeah.
I'm not worried about having perfect blood work or having,
Because you won't. And that's one thing T keeps saying, that you guys will not have perfect blood work too. If you have to take a blood test or a blood panel in the middle of prep, just understand it's going to be completely fucked up. It is not something that you should be advocating, or anybody who's telling you to take one, unless you just want to see where your levels are at just for fun. Be like, well, how messed up are they? But like, you cannot utilize that as like a health progression and be like, wow, my liver enzymes are all messed up. Well, of course they are, because you're 4 weeks out. So understand that too. That's prep during blood work during a prep is a no-no. We always preach blood work, but that is that is to prepare you for your prep. That's a preparation thing. You should have your blood work done pre-prep and then post-prep after you come off everything and allowed everything to, but never take your blood work during prep. I remember last year I had to do it for a doctor's appointment, and I was like, we're not doing a panel. I was like, there's no way. I was like, you're going to tell me everything's wrong. And I was like, no. And that's okay to do. Like, make sure that like, if someone's asking you, say, I can't, I'm in prep right now. And most people understand that.
yeah. And I think it's not ignorance is bliss. It's just like what you're trying to do during that time period is not healthy. I don't care.
Yeah.
You can take all the health measures you want, but it's not the healthiest way you can lead your life. We're not here to say it is, and we're definitely not here to like convince anybody to do things, or to have that mentality, because we don't.
Yeah.
It's a very all-in extreme approach. And I don't think I could sit here and have a podcast with you, or any podcast for that matter, if I hadn't accepted that fact many, many years ago. And now it's like I work with a lot of younger people, and I just want to kind of preface them, where I didn't really get prefaced. Everything I saw along the way, nothing was like scary enough to make me like, oh, I'm out. This is too much for me. Like, it just is like, I want to keep going. So I think the biggest thing you can remember, especially as a female, is the devil is in the dose, and the dose has to be thought about as compounding over the years.
Yes.
So if you have
That's the hardest thing. I will say, I'm
52
glad
weeks in a year, and you contest prep season, you have to figure out, well, I'm probably going to be on for a lot longer of a period in a contest prep. You know what I mean? I don't think, let's just use arbitrary numbers. Let's say there's going to be 16 weeks of being on PEDs, and all the ancillaries are going to come in, all of that. That's 16 straight weeks of use. That's part of your year. There has to be part of your off season where you're going to either come off, or if you're high enough up to where coming off for long periods is going to make you lose too much. Because at a certain point, you're not going to be able to retain the amount of muscle you've built on nothing.
Right.
Unless it's part of like you're going to take a long off season. You're doing something to fix your health. So being on is counterproductive for that. There's different cases, but the amount of muscle I carry, for example, I'm not keeping that on traditional TRT for months and months and months and months. It's just happening. I'm past that point. When you're younger, you don't have as much muscle. I think you can do that. You could even come off completely if that's something you want to do as a male for fertility reasons. But at the end of the day, like, the longer you're in it, the more muscle you carry, the more you're probably going to stay on when you're quote unquote off. That's how it goes. A cruise has different meanings, because I know guys that cruise on 500 because they run 2 to 2.5 grams on their blast. So 500 is a very low amount for them. It's going to be different than someone who's 2 years into it. But again, the devil's in the dose. If you have a long contest prep season, that's why picking your shows and being strategic, I think that's something that you did really well throughout your amateur career, was you didn't get caught in these like 9 to 10 month comp seasons. That's where I've seen that happen to girls, especially, to where they do that 1 year, and then for whatever reason, maybe they like have issues with off season because they spent so long lean that they just have to get back in a prep. And then they do that for another year. And then maybe they do that and then, like, we're looking at 3 years where they've been on for 25 to 27 months on cycle. And it's like, these are where you're going to start to see the expediting of the side effects you mentioned at the beginning of the episode. Like, this person has went from like pretty feminine to now has a harsh jawline. The voice has dropped multiple octaves. there might be facial hair and hair everywhere that was never present. Like there might be a lot of things happening at a very quick rate because you've gotten stuck in the competitive ringer of having to compete to be comfortable with yourself.
Yeah. Now, it is possible, and you can even see this online. I have seen women, and a lot more are coming forward on Instagram too, of ex-competitors, and they don't bash the sport, but they show what they look like during the drug use and during their show, and then they retired from the sport. And I will say these women, some of these women have played it very smart, and you can see, like, obviously you can still tell that they had taken stuff, but their femininity came back a lot. I mean, I've seen 18-month transformation. So that is something that it's like, wow, she still looks amazing, and she did it smart. And so it is possible too. I'm not, T and I aren't meant to like trying to scare you guys, but it is possible too. This stuff, if you are smart about it, as we're telling you now, it is possible that when you retire from the sport to come out of it, the reversal is a lot easier, and you do still have some of those feminine traits. But as T was just explaining, when you are just going and going and going, that's when we really see it. It takes a long time for your body to just kind of like stop and reset. And I mean, you're taking something for 22 months, your body, I mean, it's going to be fucked. So, everything is possible to come off of smartly. It's just, you have to make sure that you have your head straight in that game, that you don't get addicted to the process to the point where you don't know when to stop. I mean, I have, and I'm going to even admit this, probably like 5 years into the sport, I love my level of leanness, and I tried to bring that off season. I tried to delay my off season and go and keep that physique for another 2 months because I had photo shoots, and didn't, my coach was like trying to get me off stuff, but I wanted to stay really lean for my photo shoots. And I remember my photo shoot, because I didn't follow the protocol and just did stuff on my own, I was super watery. I was super bloated. I had water retention issues for the next 6 months that I had to battle because I did not come off properly and just decided to just do my own thing, take all my compound smells, keep staying nice and, try to stay nice and lean. And we see these adverse effects that happen too, because certain compounds are only supposed to be made to run for certain times. And that's what we start seeing too. So it's, we can only preach and give you guys knowledge as much as possible. Obviously, like, we can't hold your hand and tell you, like, we're just giving you guidance, but it's just everything. You could do something and nothing could ever happen to you. You could be a weird genetic freak, but for 99% of the people, this knowledge I want you guys to take and just be like, well, it might not be as extreme, but this could happen to me. And just keep it in the back of your mind, because there's so much misinformation in the sport. And, T and I live and breathe this stuff. So we've been around the ringer a lot to understand. And I've seen people have aged horribly in the sport, and I've seen people who have aged very gracefully in the sport. So it all depends on how you kind of utilize your time now in your off season, and how you're smart with your choices and your compound usage, and making sure that you're doing everything in your off season, keeping your skin clean, making sure you're coming off stuff. If you need to get filler, if you need to get some sort of, skincare routine going on, anything that's going to really help preserve what you can health-wise for this.
Yeah, a lot of it too could be like personal preference. What bothers some people might not bother other people. So it's I think even people that are not in bodybuilding and don't take PEDs deal with that. What is of importance to you to try to, improve as you age? Because you can't fight the aging process one way or the other. Bodybuilding itself is very aging. I mean, the training, pushing large quantities of food is going to have an effect on your digestive system. I think that's why so many of us have issues. The stress that you're putting yourself under to get ready for shows plays a role in the aging. So bodybuilding as a whole could be something that can be considered to speed up the aging process. So you're going to want to do as many things as you can to, counteract that. But some things just might not be like, it's never bothered me that I look older because of the things I've done. Like, it is what it is. I'm not trying to look like a fountain of youth. I don't do things for myself that would help that. Maybe when I'm done competing, I'll start investing in that stuff. But it's just not something that's important to me. So as a female, I think, like you said earlier, if having breast implants and that look and, that feeling is something that's important to you, then do it. I don't think I would make that decision based solely off competing, because you're not going to be able to identify as a competitor your whole life. There's going to be a time where you have to detach from that identity. And if you only got implants because you thought it might leverage you better placings or doing better within bodybuilding, you might hate that decision and it might plague you down the line. So I think the division probably matters. I see more people in the bikini wellness and figure that have implants than I do in women's physique and female bodybuilding. But they're there. I mean, there's female bodybuilders and women's physique who have implants. Training with that might look different, as in you bought a shelf, you bought the development, so you might not need to train that anymore. And that's just part of, if it's already built, you don't need it anymore, right? So there might be no train. I know a lot of females with implants who do zero press work other than maybe for like a delt, but they're not doing high incline, they're not doing bench press, Smith machine, dumbbells, any of that, because one, they don't need to, and two, the risk is too great. Like it's not worth tearing an implant, having to get another surgery and dealing with something of that nature. So if you make that decision but you love to train chest, maybe that's not the decision for you to make. You know what I mean? So but I think it's probably division dependent, but I've never seen someone do better or worse because they did or didn't have implants. In a lot of cases too, it can, depending on the size, if you go too big for your frame, you could throw off your proportions. Like if you're in wellness, they want you lower body dominant, and you're a small frame girl and you get a huge set of implants, that might take away from the flow of the physique. So maybe,
and those aren't reversible. Like you can't get them. I mean, you have to pay to get them smaller. Whereas like, for someone who naturally has boobs and they just work out harder, you're going to have the fat loss. So that's also, I'm glad that you brought that up because that's very important to understand.
Right. So it's a good topic. It's a good, like the same thing we did with last week's episode. I think it's just bringing awareness to a lot of these things. But I think when you have discussions with younger people, and maybe this is true for you too, it's cool to have the discussions, but I've almost started to see that if someone is almost worried about a lot of these things that we talk about, they're already kind of outing themselves that like the longevity of this isn't for you. It's something you can try, but I think too, social media has put such a pressure on people to, like, they have to, their best physique or they're going to make it is like going to happen in their 20s. And I just saw a post that the guy that runs Leviathan Nutrition, owns Leviathan, posted where he met a guy, a bodybuilder in the gym who's 69, and he said he wasn't his biggest until he was 48 years old. And I think I saw a female comment on the Emily Schubert YouTube talking about how she's 56 and she'd been doing this for years and she still had a similar to physique when she was at her peak. And I think a lot of people underestimate like the marathon part of all this. I mean, I don't even underestimate it, but I lose sight of it sometimes because it's like it does put that pressure on you to, like, especially as you get older, you see like somebody that's 24 already rising and it's like, damn, I got to get to it. But
and I don't know if it's a trend. Like, do you feel like it's a trend though, too? Because I also, like, I know in my gym, everyone wants to compete. They all want to be bodybuilders. They post on social media, oh, I'm cutting and I'm bulking. And I also feel like it's almost like a fad right now where like people all want to compete and want to be in the industry without knowing. And I just did a thing on my story the other day because I was so sick of kids being like, oh, I'm bulking now and I just finished, or I'm cutting now and I just finished my bulk. And I'm like, no, like I was like, you're basically on a diet. I was like, you're on a crash diet. You're not bulking because you haven't put on any weight and you're not technically cutting because you're just dieting down. Cutting in terms of bodybuilding is completely different than dieting in the real world. And so I this like my little irritated things. I'm like, oh, I was like, if they only knew. But I've noticed that more is you either have the really extreme bodybuilders, we see Sam Sulek and we see, he kind of is admired by the younger generation. And that's great and all, but it's also like, it's a trend. I feel like I feel like it's almost like everyone wants to be a bodybuilder without understanding, and people are buying all these things and putting them in their body and they're not aware of like what the food and all the natural stuff can do for you first. So it's just like, it breaks my heart where I'm happy that we're trending. I'm happy the bodybuilding community is trending, but at the same time, I'm sad because it's just so much misinformation and people don't understand the longevity and how much time. It's not instant gratification. You can't just step on stage and go pro. And I think that's really that huge misconception is, oh, I can still be, I can still do all this stuff and just go pro and it'll just be a little snippet out of my life where people like we live, breathe, this is our lives. Like, these are our lives. Like, I'm a mom and I still am able to, that's my livelihood here is my bodybuilding,
Yeah, it's definitely trending. It's different than it was
way different.
years ago, and it's probably it was different then than it was 10 years before that. I think there's obviously evolution that happens,
Yeah.
social media being a big part of that, but even the different divisions, because when we got into it, it was just men's bodybuilding and men's physique. And then
Yeah.
I believe it was maybe women's physique was just starting.
It was like the second year. Yeah.
May have just before that, it was just female bodybuilding, figure, and then bikini.
Yep.
And if you look at the evolution of those divisions, they've actually like brought femininity back into female bodybuilding since they revitalized it. And the level of muscularity in bikini and figure, and now women's physique has just like skyrocketed.
Yeah.
You look at where people were in like 2010 to 2015.
Yeah. They wouldn't even place now. You look at like DLB or Nicole Wilkins, that when they both were in Olympia, like they wouldn't even probably place in top 15 now with the credentials and what the criteria is. And that's why it's evolved so fast.
Yeah. Nicole Wilkins would be last call outs.
Yeah.
And even in the women's physique, Juliana Malacarni.
Yeah.
She won like 3 or 4 in a row and just walked away because she saw the direction it was going and didn't want, like, that was a choice. So
yeah,
at the time, I think I looked at that and I was like, well, why would you do that? And now it was like pretty cool to see someone making a decision that's like, hey, I'm the champion, but I don't want to keep pushing my body to these extremes.
And look at, she had a baby now. Like, I mean, that's a person who's really played smart in the sport. She was able to have a child, and now, good for her. She still practices her fitness, but she doesn't. And that's how you successfully retire from the sport, maintain a healthy, your health and wellness overall, and still be able to, have a family and go on. And I think she's a great advocate. She doesn't talk poorly about the sport. And I think she's a great advocate. She was very humble, left, and, now has her life. And I think she's a great, role model for the sport because of that.
Yeah. I mean, you get like your perspective and you get what you put into it. You have the right to walk away on your own terms whenever you want. And you don't have to be bitter at bodybuilding like it did all these things to you.
Yeah.
And that's probably the number one thing I cannot stand is when people do that, especially if they try to blame drugs or judges or this or that. It's like no one put a gun to your head. Maybe a coach is like influential. And that's on you. Because there is a lot of information, I realize it's hard to know which information is correct, but at the same time, like it falls on you. These are your choices. There's things that have happened in my journey where it was like I was faced with the things I'm facing now from a health perspective are because of decisions I've made. I have no one to point the finger at. Even pointing them at myself isn't going to do anything because it's like, this is just part of the game.
Yeah.
This was a choice. Like I just don't like when people try to point the finger and blame bodybuilding or blame, I think coaches, there should be, I would never blame a coach, but I think it's just, you can do better as a coach and be real with people and not, especially with girls, you don't have to gas them with drugs to build your name, because you can get a quick response with females when you give them PEDs. If you do it for like,
honestly, for females, I'll say this. The number one thing I deal with females is their stress. I always tell, if you're a coach, it's usually their stress and their sleep that pretty much is all out of whack. And if you get those, we'll be like, wow, their bodies, it's like a 180 completely. I always see that. I'll be like, I get competitors and I'm like, how's your sleep? How's your stress? Oh, nothing, but I'm taking this. I'm like, no, let's just get your sleep and stress. And it's like a complete 180. And I always say that's usually 99% of the thing is what's wrong is you guys aren't getting enough sleep and you guys have too high of stress and you don't know how to manage it.
Yeah, no, I think, but yeah, competing is a lot more open to than it was in the
Yeah.
sense of, I think Chris Bumstead, and I don't, this isn't a knock on Chris, he's great, great champion, but his presence in the classic physique division, especially on the male side, kind of opened the door for everybody who lifts weights just to want to then compete.
Yeah.
Whereas before you didn't have that division, so you kind of had to like, you had to be a fan of like muscle and huge dudes, and I was. That's like what drew me in, is like Jay Cutler, Dory, like, man, these guys are massive and I want to be that. So it's just a different time. Same thing with females. I think the bikini division has really blossomed into every girl that gets a gym membership and starts lifting weights, you know, maybe within a year, she's already talking about doing a show. Whereas I think before you kind of had to really love lifting weights and love training on a different level to even fathom competing.
Yeah.
So it's just different. It's just open to, which I guess is cool in the sense of the sport's growing, but it's hard to be around. I know at my gym, I eavesdrop on a lot of conversations, and it's just like, and a lot of these people that even have aspirations to compete couldn't follow a plan with a coach for a month straight.
Yeah.
And you're talking about competing, and it's like, hire a coach, live
Yeah.
like a bodybuilder for 12 months straight, and then think about maybe doing a show to see if you can even do that.
Yeah.
But the whole concept of like lifting weights, getting a camera, and wanting to do a show all in like a small span of time is just, it's just a different time. So yeah, it's definitely, we're just a product of the times. We got to adapt. I try not to sound bitter or old about it, but it is comical to me. I think the longer you're in bodybuilding, the less you really. I think it's funny because there's a lot of young dudes at my gym, and it's almost like they're giving someone their stats every time they meet them. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm
Yeah.
5'9", I'm 160, I'm cutting right. I'm like,
Yep. Yep. Hey, I bet you 225 yesterday for 2. I'm gonna go for 315 today.
yeah, it's like a fucking a baseball card they're handing me, and it's like, that's great, man. Like, have at it. Like,
Yeah.
it's just interesting that there's a lot of the bulking and cutting is like everyone has to identify as one or the other, where it's like, for me, for 10 years in bodybuilding, it's been, am I getting ready for a show or no? Those are the only two differences. There's no like vacation cuts or anything
Yeah.
like, I either need muscle or I need to lose body fat. There's no delineation of it. So just a different time, but I know we're coming up on time. You got a consult, so I'm gonna go train legs. Guys, drop your comments down below. I like these ones where we can just jam, you and me.
Yeah.
Getting guests is fun. We'll get more. We have some lined up. But anything you guys want to hear, drop in the comments below. What do you like? What don't you like? If you're in a competition prep this year, I've already had to reel a couple of my clients in who are realizing they don't have as much muscle as they thought they were going to have now that the holiday bloat and the off-season compounds have come out. It's a long game, guys. It's a very long game. Like, you're never going to be as big and have as much muscle as you think, guy or girl. And you need to be, you're not in contest shape until your fattest body part is in contest shape. So
yeah, but that's like the words of Shelby Starnes. You're only as lean as your fattest body part.
Just keep that in mind. It kills me when I see people, the quality of shows going down more and more and more because people just aren't respecting the amount of time that it takes to lose body fat. Like,
yeah,
it takes months and months, especially like when we talk skin. I mean, that's we'll cover that on a different podcast. But for Shannon, Seeley, I'm Tommy Stiles. Until next time, we're out of here.